Hi da di da di 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 da di da di da di di di. Hi da di da di 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 di. Hi da di da di 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 di. Hoi yo di da di da di da di. Hi da da di. Hi di 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 da di. We're learning the laws of Tevilat Keilim, or how to Toivel dishes. Today, if you're watching live, we are on Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance for those who made the ultimate sacrifice defending Eretz Yisrael, and we have in mind learning for at least their neshamas, and anybody who is listening should be aware that is what we're holding in today, remembering all those who died al Kiddush Hashem defending and the land of Eretz Yisrael. And we're learning the laws of Tevilat Keilim. We're in chapter 37 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Just a reminder that based on the Torah pasuk, we have the obligation to check these things. I mean, to toivel these things. And I can, if you look in Bamidbar, the chapter 31, 23, that is where we learn the laws of Tevilat Keilim about having to immerse these vessels. In Yiddish, you call it toiveling, and so the class I called how to toivel dishes. But of course, it's much more than dishes, right? It's pots, pans, anything used in the preparation of food. It could even be a blender blade we would want to get into the mikva. You might say, what about the blender itself? Well, only the parts that come in contact. And we'll discuss also, what about, let's say, an oven, like a toaster oven. You toivel the toaster oven. We'll look at that. But let's move on. We're in chapter 37, number 7. Follow along with us. Yisrael shenasan kesef oshar mine matachos leuman akum. You had some piece of silver, and actually we had this. We had a silver becher that belonged to a great grandparent. It's not pure silver, but it looks nice, and it was damaged, and we went and got it fixed. And the places you get them fixed, they're non-Jewish craftsmen. Shiaselo keli. So now you fixed it and you made it usable again. Let's say you had some kind of pot or pan which you got repaired. It wasn't usable. Now it's usable. So here he's talking about a cup or a pot or something that got a hole in it, and because of where the hole is, it can't hold a Revi'it. And this is going to be the kind of the litmus test. Is it a vessel or not? Can it hold a Revi'it, which is a quantity of liquid? And if we want to remind ourselves how much a Revi'it is, a Revi'it is equivalent to a KeBaytzah and a half, which we'll explain, and it's displacement, and so this liquid volume, and I apologize, I thought I had it right here in my notes. What would that be, the equivalent in ounces? So we'll have to just put that into the show notes as well. And so that is the minimum requirement, a Revi'it. So let's say you have a Kiddush cup and they've got a little hole, you want to get it fixed. So where it where the hole is, below that line, how much can it hold? So if where you fill up the water, there's not a Revi'it, tzarich gam ken tevila b'lo bracha, then you have to Toivel this cup in the mikva, but you do it without a bracha. And it's because of machlokus, whether it's considered like a new vessel or not, now that it's been fixed. And the improvement doesn't give ownership, but it wasn't usable without their involvement, so it kind of has this status of like a new vessel. Okay, so we're going to toivel without a bracha, which is a good reminder for all of us. Number 8, there's no need to immerse vessels. Okay, every single vessel that comes in contact with food. Only that which is used for food. Right, that is ready to be eaten immediately, without any further preparation. Okay, those are the things that require immersion. So dishes and cutlery, which are used for fully prepared food. Pots, because it comes in contact with it up until the point when it's ready to be eaten. Utensils that are used to process food, they can have later, but never come into contact with prepared food, which might not. They probably don't require immersion. But let's look at that. For example, so when you make matzah, there are certain utensils that are used, right, for rolling out, like these iron rolling pins. So those don't come into contact with food that's readily eaten, right? It's just a preparation. So those don't need tefillah. Or a knife, which is used to just cut dough, right? You make dough and you just use this knife to cut dough. It wouldn't need to be tefillah. A needle, which is used to sew food together. So let's say you're making one of these fancy dishes with chicken or meat where you sew in things inside it. Okay, that needle is not used with prepared food, only with preparation. Because if anything like that, these things do not need tefillah because they're only used during the preliminary stages of food preparation, not on food that is ready to be eaten. Aval sakin shel shchita, but a slaughtering knife, what about that? And a knife used for skinning animals. Okay, but since a knife like this could be used to prepare food, tasim or the trays which unbaked matzahs are placed before they're put in the oven, these would require immersion without a bracha. Because although they're primarily used before the food is ready for eating, but they also could be used for food right before it's eaten, right? The trays, for example, or the knife. So you'd want to toivel them. Dreyfus, shema midin elav esakadera. A dreyfus is a tripod upon which a pot is placed while cooking. So, back in the day when you cooked over an open fire, so you had this kind of tripod thing where you put the pot in the middle of it. So apparently that's a dreyfus. Since the food doesn't come in contact with this tripod, right? There's only holding up the pot. It doesn't require immersion. Aval shapud, that is a spit, which is made out of some kind of metal. Shel matachas, you put it, right, to make shish kebab or something else, tzliya, put it on the fire like that with the shish kebab. So that, and you're going to roast meat on it. That requires immersion, right? With a bracha, because it's literally on the food when it's ready to be cooked, when it's ready to be eaten. Some say that a large glass vessel, like a storage, like a big jug or a bottle, like a big water container, you don't drink from it. Like I'm thinking in my mind, like, some of these fancier water companies, they deliver spring water in glass, right? If it's plastic, you don't have to worry about it, right? Poland Spring or Arrowhead or whatever you have, or what I want to say Sizzler, but it's not Sizzler. Okay, so these kind of water companies delivering those plastic jugs, those you don't have to worry about. Those don't need. But what about the ones that, and some people have them at home, these large glass containers, they fill them with filtered water, or they are on top of a filter. So now it's in contact with the water you're going to be drinking, but it's also kind of a storage container, okay? But you don't drink from it. It only holds the beverage in there, okay? So what about those? And then you pour from that into cups. This is not called a vessel for a meal. It doesn't need to go into the mikva. However, can you imagine? There's a disagreement. And some say it does require to be put in the mikvah. And Ein Yad Ephraim, if you want to look into that, you could look at the Yad Ephraim's commentary on the Yoredeah, chapter 120, number 1. And therefore, he would advise you should toivel this without a bracha. We went through a bunch of things in number 8 here, which I still want to deal with. So first, we talked about something which is used just up until the point where it's eaten, like the shput, the spit, the shish kebab. Now, what about a bread toaster? So, the bread toaster, it comes in contact with the bread. I guess you could say the bread's already cooked. So the Igros Moshe discusses this. And he says, since the purpose of the bread toaster is to dry out bread that is already baked, it's not considered a meal utensil. Should know, I've bumped into other opinions that say you do need to toivel it. And unfortunately, though, today's modern toasters, if you were to dunk it in the mikvah, it ain't gonna work again. So please don't put your toaster in, and certainly don't put it in the mikvah when it's still plugged in. Okay. Sorry, bad joke. And keep in mind, right, Tzifur about tomorrow. Thank you. So now, a couple more things. What about the blender blade or the Cuisinart blade? Isn't that just a preparation? Well, the answer is sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're going to put something in the blender, you're going to eat it right away. Sometimes the Cuisinart blade, you're going to eat it right away. Sometimes not. So the plastic container doesn't require it, but the blade would on a Cuisinart or a food processor. Blenders a lot of times are glass, so I guess we want to get that in there into the mikvah. Now, what about a whiskey bottle or other things like that? So Rav Moshe writes that one who buys whiskey or coffee in a glass bottle or other food item in cans from a non-Jew does not require to immerse these bottles containers before using them with other food. Okay, so right, you had a nice right We have a nice bottle of whiskey. We finished the whiskey. And now do I have to Toivel this or not? Okay. So listen to this. Listen to this rabbinic reasoning here. Since the bottle and the container have no real, they cost money to manufacture, but they alone have no intrinsic value to the seller. They're just intended as a way of getting you to buy the contents, right? They want you to buy the whiskey. They don't want you to buy the bottle, right? As opposed to going to the store and buying, containers. And it's only in the hands of the Jewish person who bought it that it now has some kind of status and importance as a utensil in its own right? Because now that it's empty of whiskey, you say, but this would be good for putting something else in. So therefore, it says it doesn't need to be toiveled, and they're deemed utensils made by a Jew because it was in the hands of the Jewish person when this became usable. Now, what about a Jewish person who's manufacturing whiskey? Do they need to toivel the bottles? Same thing, not. The bottle is I don't believe so, inconsequential. They're just trying to sell the whiskey. And then if a person decides on their own to use this whiskey bottle for something else, so then they've acquired it in that way, in the same way. Okay. And even because the manufacture of the bottle, again, is really where everything comes. So number 9, quickly. What about a pepper grinder? So he says you should do it because of the metal blades. But the lower section, which receives the ground spices, because it's made from wood, it does not require immersion. Coffee grinder, you could do without a bracha. For the same reasoning, the coffee grinder, like the slaughtering knife, is mostly used for unfinished food because the coffee has to be cooked in the hot water before it's ground. But the grinder can sometimes so if you have a coffee grinder, it's only used for coffee, which we have at our home, but we didn't always. We used to have sometimes another grinder, so maybe that would have to be immersed. Again, it gets tricky. What if it's going to ruin it, right? If it's going to ruin the device, that's a whole nother question. But the pepper mill as well. So if the pepper mill could be toivel. Now, what about today? You buy these disposable pepper mills, right? It's the same price. It's a disposable pepper mill. So that's not going to require a tevilah. However, if you're going to use this afterwards for other spices, maybe it would require. Everybody have an awesome day. See you tomorrow.